Did you know that Google personalizes many searches by city and Also Asked is the only tool to access live People Also Asked data at city level? Try for free at alsoasked.com.
Tired of SEO guesswork? Quadra's AI agent goes deeper to uncover high-impact optimizations and completes hours of SEO in minutes. Get started now.
I was going to say that SEO with Fat Joe is as peaceful as this, but then the birds are all having fights.
Thank you for the intros, and thank you, Brighton, for, willingly signing away 20 minutes of your morning to listen to me prattle on. I'm Andy. As Sarah says, I've been at Brainlab forever, and in today's session, I'm going to try and get quite metaphysical in some senses. So I'm going to be asking, does page search strategy exist? Number one. And if it does, what is it? And I guess perhaps infuriatingly, I might not come to any hard and fast conclusions by the end of this. I'll leave that with your good selves to make up your minds afterwards. But hopefully, if everything goes as planned, we'll maybe get a few neurons firing in ways that they haven't fired before and generate some new ideas and some new thinking. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with, a bit of a gripe. It's a nice way to bring us all together. As I'm sure is the case with many of you in the room, I have a personal loathing for business jargon and just general shit that people say in an office environment, right? I hope you can all agree. Right at the top of the list for me, or it certainly was the case maybe slightly earlier in my career when I was a bit more junior, was when you'd hear from someone, be strategic, not tactical. You'd always get this, or I would at least, from someone who's more senior, in theory, a bit more wizened as to what they were doing. And they'd always have a bit of a echo of smugness in their voice as they said it. And I'd always come away from those conversations or feedback sessions or whatever we want to call them, thinking, well, that's really bloody unhelpful because actually, I don't know what the difference is between those two things. It's not immediately obvious. They're quite hazy concepts to grasp, these ideas of strategy and tactics. So it's all well and good that you're telling me to be strategic, but I don't actually know what I have to do off the back of that. And as I find myself dwelling on these conversations more and more, I'd be asking myself, well, they both seem like good things in practice, so don't we need to be both rather than one over the other? And eventually, as I got more and more cynical, I'd start questioning whether that person themselves even knew the difference between what they were actually telling me to do here. And the problem is that we in the paid search industry are very guilty of, it's not a crime, I'm going to call it a crime for the purpose of this talk. We love to throw the S word around. So if you search for, anything related to paid search strategy, what is paid search strategy, how should we do it, then articles such as these will probably be some of the top kind of blogs that come up on Google. I've read through most of these in prep for this talk. You can do the same afterwards if you like. They're very good at giving tips and pointers as to the sorts of things you might try and do to make your paid search strategy better. But crucially, in my view at least, they're very light on the details of what paid search strategy actually means. And maybe I'm too pedantic, but I think if we're going to try and optimize or maximize something, then we should at least have a pretty firm idea of what that thing is before we get cracking with it. I have also tried turning to AI for help on this as well. But Google gives you, a characteristically bland response here. I appreciate that's small for everyone. It's just a load of guff, so you don't really need to worry about reading it. So if publishers can't help us with this question, and if AI, surprise, surprise, can't help us with this question, a few weeks ago I thought, well, maybe this is something that as an industry we can try and solve together and try and figure out as a collective. So I took to the internet and shared with the good people of LinkedIn a very brief survey with just one question in it, which is, what does paid search strategy mean to you? I was pleasantly surprised with the number of people who responded to this, and also clearly the amount of thought that people had put into their answers. And there were some good suggestions that came through here. But the number one takeaway that I found from this exercise was that there was no consensus here at all. Everyone had something slightly different to offer, a slightly different take on things in terms of what their personal understanding of paid search strategy was. And so we fast forward to the present day where I'm now here trying to present, my view of the world for you to all, snipe at and disagree with afterwards. Before we get onto actually some of those ideas, though, there are some marketers, perhaps many marketers, who would argue that paid search strategy doesn't even exist. Like, it's actually a contradiction in terms. And I think it's potentially quite a compelling argument. So we should definitely hear it out first before we get on to, I guess, some of the more ideas to come later on. So very quick show of hands. We've been doing a lot of show of hands so far in these first few sessions. Who in the room recognises or is vaguely familiar with this person? We're seeing a few hands go up. Yeah, not bad, not bad. For those who are not familiar, this person is Mark Ritson. He is undoubtedly one of the most, I guess, prominent voices or thought leaders, you could say, in kind of like the marketing discipline in general. He spent most of his career doing kind of like brand consultancy gigs for clients. And over the last few years, he's run a very successful and very good online training course called his Mini MBA, which, disclaimer, I'm a former student of. And it would be fair to say that Mark comes from what you could call a classical school of thinking around the marketing process and strategy's role within marketing. And what that classical view of the world says is strategy is 3 questions, or more specifically, strategy is the answer to 3 very specific questions, which would be, who are we targeting? Now, this is not, I guess, which users are we showing our ads to? It's a much bigger question than that, which is actually, which customers is our business trying to serve? The second question would be positioning, which is effectively when our brand comes to mind for our target customer, what are the associations and attributes that we want to appear in that person's head alongside our brand? And finally, having chosen our target, having chosen how we want to position to them, what are our objectives? So what are the metrics that we're hoping to move, over what time frame, and by how much? Okay. Once we've answered those 3 things, they're clearly a set of interconnected questions, then that is our strategy. And that then becomes our guiding light for everything on the right-hand side over here, which is the entire tactical toolkit, which we have. So basically any lever that we could pull in a market that a customer can see and can feel from us. So what's the product that we're building? How are we pricing that product? What marketing communications are we doing around that product? And how are we distributing it, i.e., how does the customer actually get their hands on that product or service? And I think this kind of model is very helpful in many ways. It's quite simplistic. It keeps things nice and straightforward as to, this is exactly how you do strategy in marketing, and here is what you would do next once you've got your strategy in place, and that is useful. However, if you subscribe to this view of the world, have I clicked through too far? No, sorry. If you subscribe to this view of the world, then there's an implicit follow-on here that paid search strategy cannot be a thing at all, because paid search is a marketing channel or an advertising channel, which sits very much in the tactical realm, and we must have done all of our strategy before we got onto tactics. So by kind of, I guess, that alone, like paid search strategy can't exist. And similarly, by the same kind of argument, you could say, well, SEO strategy also can't be a thing. Content strategy, now we're getting rid of that as well. And digital strategy and creative strategy, whatever you might want to say. So I'll leave that with you to ponder for a moment. I personally, if someone came up to me at the end of this talk and said, you know what, I actually think Mark's onto something there, like paid search strategy is not a thing, and Andy, you're going to spend the rest of your career being like a tactical operator, I would be a little bit put out, but I think my ego would recover and the world would keep spinning. But that's one view that I think is helpful to be aware of. However, it's not the only view. So let's think about the alternatives. Is there a world in which paid search strategy can exist? And again, I'm going to do some, I guess, borrowing of thinking from other disciplines outside of the world of search directly, and then see how can we retrofit some of those ideas into the PPC space that we all inhabit. This time, the person that I'm going to steal from is a guy called Roger Martin. Again, very, very big name on kind of like the overall like marketing scene, I guess you could say. Roger is probably the most well-renowned corporate strategy consultant alive today. I think it's probably fair to say. And he has very little to say on paid search specifically. He has a hell of a lot to say on strategy and corporate strategy. I don't know how many books he's written on the topic, but it's quite a lot. And Roger's definition of strategy is a set of interconnected decisions that hypothesize how you're going to win. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to say that sentence again because it's the most important sentence in my entire presentation. Strategy is a set of interconnected decisions that hypothesize how you're going to win. Now, there are a few, I guess, kind of like immediate things that we see that are, potentially helpful features of this definition compared to the previous one. So automatically, this is a lot broader. Whereas previously, we were saying strategy is about answering 3 very specific questions. This is a bit more vague. And as we'll see, that kind of like flexibility and that extra wiggle room it gives us means that, we probably can find a niche for what paid search strategy could potentially be. It's also helpful in that it allows us to kind of like immediately rule out, I guess, some perhaps like obvious candidates for how people might describe strategy, but actually don't quite fit the bill. So one example of that might be, and this comes up in a lot of one-to-one conversations I have with people when I've bugged them on this topic, is people might say, I think tactics are short-term and strategy is anything that's long-term. And it's very easy to see why, people might have that as an intuitive idea. I guess the reason why this falls down is that if this were true, then strategy is just tactics that we're doing later, which doesn't really feel like a sensible way of delineating the two. In a similar sort of vein, people might say, well, we've got a roadmap, we've got timelines, and that's what our strategy is going to be. But actually, if you strip back what a roadmap is, it's really just a collection of things that we're going to do with some sense of, I guess, like time linearity associated to them. So a roadmap is a collection of tactics. And by this definition, strategy is a set of integrated decisions. It's not a set of tactics. So this one doesn't work either. And then the final one, which I've thrown in here, which is not to say that it's not important, but it's also wrong in terms of answering this question, is our strategy is to endlessly test the latest AI features and betas. So obviously, all of us in that room are doing this pretty much with 100% of our working time, I suspect, and it is clearly very important. But the reason why this would fall foul of, being a sensible definition for PPC strategy is that everyone ultimately has access to those same AI features and betas. Maybe if, you're really hot at like jumping on something, you might get a brief bit of first mover advantage. Ultimately, that competitive advantage is not going to last ever. So doing that isn't going to allow you to win long-term against competitors. So I've spent the first 12 minutes of this talk doing nothing other than stealing other people's ideas and then throwing some shade on other potential ideas as well. So you'd be pleased to know that's going to stop. And I'm actually going to try and provide some, valuable, constructive ideas in the final few minutes. So what do I think paid search strategy could possibly be that fits in with this Roger Martin definition of overall strategy? I'm going to propose that there are 2 tangible activities that can be considered as being paid search strategic thinking. The first one is KPI setting. It's probably easiest to, convey what I'm going on about here through a couple of examples. So if first of all we imagine that we're a retailer, there's probably a number of different statements we can make. So we might say, for example, selling via web has the lowest operating expenditure for us, and therefore it's the most profitable, and we're going to care about profits. So this is important for us. Or we might say, to maximize our market share, it's essential that we're supporting both online and in-store customer journeys. Shout out to Hannah. Or alternatively, someone could say, we see the highest lifetime value from customers who buy through our app rather than any of our other distribution channels. And each of these 3 things are quite, in many ways, they're mutually exclusive. You can't prioritize one of them and then say, but we also want to do number 2 and 3 as well. You have to pick one and kind of like follow that path. Otherwise, you'll be jumping around trying to do different things all the time. But each of these things then has a very, direct set of consequences and a very clear direction for what you'd actually do to activate in your account. So if you were a business that cared most of all about option 1, then it's pretty obvious that you'd want to be ingesting profitability data into your account and optimizing towards that metric. Whereas if you chose option 2, you'd be thinking, well, we need to get some kind of store visits and store sales tracking set up and do some form of omni-channel bidding. Whereas number 3, you'd be thinking about stuff like web to app connect, siphoning off some of your budget to do, app install campaigns. And in each of those 3 cases, your actual activity that's left over at the end would look quite different in each of those three scenarios. I guess a similar example, just to try and make that same point again, would be if we're, say, like an airline operator, we could, for instance, have like fairly analogous comments of, we care about maximizing the top line revenue that we make on our bookings. That'd be a nice and simple way. Or we could think, well, actually, we want to target users who are more likely to book with us more than once within a certain year. We've had airline clients before who have had that as their explicit objective. Or we could say, for instance, we're losing money every time a plane departs without a certain number of the seats filled, because obviously there's fuel and staff costs every time we have to operate a flight. And so it's actually critical that we always make sure our planes are filled to, 80% of total capacity or whatever it may be. Again, each of these three things are very different statements, and they give very, they'll significantly impact the way that we set up our campaigns, the data that we feed into our campaigns and what we choose to optimize towards. But we can only pick one of these three things. And that in itself, I would argue, is a strategic lens, the activity that we can be doing in paid search, where we're actually thinking about what do we really want to get out of this activity. For many businesses, the answer might be obvious, but in many cases, I would argue it's not obvious, and there is a choice and there are trade-offs to be made. And that is really kind of like at the heart of what strategy has to be. My second, kind of like big strategic activity that I'm going to propose would be in a similar sort of vein, thinking about budget setting. So this is a chart. What is a chart of? It's hopefully a visual that you've seen some version of at some point over the past few years. It's effectively just a visualization of the law of diminishing returns, which, as we're probably all fairly familiar with, says, as you keep spending more and more in a media channel, in paid search, say, yes, you'll continue to increase your revenue, but actually the rate at which you get the rate at which your revenue increases will decrease when you get towards those higher spend levels. And as if we map profit onto that, then it will look something like this. It will go up for a little bit and then it'll dip and eventually become negative. Every single Google Ads account adheres to this. So the exact parameters might change. Well, they definitely will change from business to business and from account to account, but everything has this general sort of shape to it. And again, once we've, kind of like recognized this and accepted this into our way of thinking, this gives us kind of like a lot of choices we can straight away make around how much should we be spending. So you might choose, and we tend to find that almost no one does choose this, interestingly, what I'd call the path of greatest profitability. So this is, we're looking, okay, where on this chart is the pink line highest, and let's spend that amount. Obviously, you won't get quite so much revenue if you go with that option. Or on probably the other end of the spectrum, being much more aggressive, you could say, well, actually, as long as paid search is break even, then I'm happy with that. So just maximize our revenues until we get to that stage. Or more likely, client somehow, without really having put too much explicit thought into it, finds himself somewhere in between those two goalposts. So I guess, again, really the point here is that this is in my view, an underutilized topic and way of thinking about budgeting in paid search. I'm sure many clients will feel this, or any kind of agencies or freelancers, when the target is, I think the ROAS target is 5, go and get that. And it feels like that's quite disjointed from any kind of thinking around, okay, well, what's actually going to be left in the bank at the end of the day? How much top line revenues are we bringing in, and how are we trading that off and making, informed decisions around profitability versus overall volume and market share. So hopefully that was helpful in some way. I'm going to leave you with, my closing thoughts, a bit of a summary then. So if we agree with the statement of strategy being a set of integrated decisions that hypothesize how you're going to win, then I would argue, and I love being told when I'm wrong, so please do hunt me down afterwards if you disagree, but I would argue that paid search strategy is about choosing the KPI you want to optimize for and choosing the amount you want to spend. Thank you all very much. And feel free to come and find me afterwards. As I say, I'm Andy from Brain Labs. Looking forward to meeting loads of you.